Next speaker will be Jamil Salmi. Hello, Jamil, do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks to the techniques. So you're very welcome to the seminar. Maybe I will introduce you in a few words. You are in Chile now, are you? In Chile?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, right. So Jamil Salmi is a global tertiary education expert who has provided policy advice to governments and university leaders in about 90 countries in all parts of the world. He works as a consultant at the Global Playground. Previously, he's worked for the World Bank as tertiary education coordinator. If it suits you, Jamil, so we would like to have a short time for discussion too. So if it's about 30 minutes to your speech and 10-15 minutes to discussion. Is it okay with you?
Sure. We have about 37 minutes because I have a prior engagement. So I will try to speak for 25 minutes and then we should have 10-15 minutes for questions and answers.
Great. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you. And I'm sorry that I cannot be in person. Although I must confess that being in Chile at this time of the year is a little bit more pleasant, I guess, than being in Finland. I thought that, since it's a bit difficult to speak at a distance, I would need some help to get me started. So I decided to consult this charming young lady to help us think about the future of tertiary education. And here is what she told me, that in the future, going to university will be compulsory for all young people in any country. And to recruit your new students, you will not rely too much on exams, but rather work through Facebook, including taking into consideration all the comments that the young future students have made on their Facebook page. In countries where it is difficult to recruit students to study engineering or basic sciences, universities will reach out to kindergarten to start motivating young children about the interest of these studies. New students will get a free Kindle or an iPad with all their textbooks when they enter university. And in the future, if students need financial assistance, instead of getting a grant from government, they will participate in an online auction on eBay to get a scholarship or a student loan. In the future, the validity of degrees will be only 5 years because of scientific advances every year. Students will be able to take their exams with open access to the internet. And in fact, in the future, they will have the right to cheat if they choose to do so. To correct their exam papers, the academics will rely on software using artificial intelligence. Some of the courses will be taught by companies, not only all courses by academics. And it'll be much cheaper to build a university in the future because we'll have only e-labs and i-libraries. Universities will be able to follow the digital footprint of their students to become aware very early if they are not following properly, if they have learning difficulties. And in fact, students will be able to buy insurance against failure when they join universities. And now maybe you're not going to laugh anymore because in the future, the salaries of university professors will be mainly determined by their student evaluations. In countries where there is too much private tutoring, governments will impose a curfew to prevent or to protect the ability of students to sleep enough. And in the future, young people, 90% of young people will wear glasses for myopia, be short-sighted, because they will have spent so much time in front of their screens and not enough times outdoors. And finally, in countries where English is not the native language, parents will have some surgery performed on their young children to cut the little skin that ties the tongue and the mouth to improve their English language pronunciation. And you may have noticed that my parents forgot to do that to me. Now, you may think that I'm telling you science fiction stories, right? I can assure you that each example I have just mentioned is a real case that I encountered in one of my travels all over the world. And I think that they symbolize the revolution that higher education is going through. And so the question is that before us today, is your system ready to participate in this revolution? And to answer the question, I have divided my presentation into three parts. First, I want to mention some of the trends and challenges that all systems face today. Second, I will provide some of the results of the benchmarking that I have prepared for the ministry. And then I will talk a little bit about the future and some reform options to be considered in the Finnish tertiary education system. Now, when we look at this mountain, it looks very peaceful, very tranquil, but I think that like the system of tertiary education, if we come closer to the mountain, we will hear some rumblings that announce an avalanche. And I believe that tertiary education today, as a famous report said last year in the UK, is facing an avalanche. I think that the changing environment is shaped by three sets of factors. First, what I call crisis factors. Second, stimulus factors. And third, disruption factors. Let me go very quickly through each one of them. As we know, since the 2007 financial crisis, in many parts of the world, we see elements of crisis with a diminution of public subsidies available for tertiary education. At the same time, the purchasing power of families is decreasing so that private funding cannot substitute for public funding. And also in many countries, the employment prospects for young graduates are very dim. Today in Spain, for example, half of the university graduates are unable to find a proper job. Here is the list of European countries where we have seen a decrease of higher education funding that is higher than 10% in real terms in the past 6 years. Czech Republic, obvious countries like Greece, Spain, but also Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, and Portugal. And even in the US, if we look at the history of the past 6 years, we see that in 48 out of 50 states, expenditure for public higher education have decreased in real terms, sometimes as much as 50% if you look at the extreme left in states like Arizona, Oregon, New Hampshire, Florida. Only 2 states, Wyoming and North Dakota, have seen a positive increase. At the same time, in some countries, governments keep investing in higher education because tertiary education is at the center of economic competitiveness. So we find the Asian dragons, we find the Nordic countries, and we find, it's at the heart of the Lisbon agenda, even though not all European countries have been able to keep investing. Some countries have launched so-called excellence initiatives, whereby they give a lot of additional money to their tertiary education system, sometimes to whole universities, sometimes only to so-called centers of excellence. I'm looking at the world, I have divided into 2 periods between 1989 and 2004, where altogether I identified 13 such initiatives, even though they are not all called excellence, but they come to the same. But look at the right side, the acceleration in the past 8-9 years. We have now 39, mainly in Asia and Europe. And here are some of the countries, and 3 out of the 4 Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, are among the countries that have given additional resources. And just to give one example, China. where they've been obsessed with the idea of improving their top universities. So they started with the 211 program and then the 985. And we see the results. According to the Shanghai ranking, we had only 9 Chinese universities in 2003. In the latest round, we have 28 universities, and that's not because the ranking is done in Shanghai, believe me. And finally, we have what I call the disruption factors that are changing the rules of the game and are heavily influencing tertiary education systems all over the world. First, the famous or infamous global rankings. Whether we like them or not, they are here to stay, and they have begun to influence the behaviors of students, employers, universities, governments. And as a result, we see a growing global talent war, to use the words of a famous book published written by Ben Wildowski recently, where universities starting to compete. Recently, I was interviewing the registrar of Oxford University, and we would think that Oxford is very rich, has nothing to worry, but even they were complaining that it's more and more difficult for them to compete with the top American or Australian universities, for example. And then we have new providers, private company, private universities, online providers that are offering courses, degrees all over the world. And last but not least, the internet and the new technologies. We've heard about the MOOCs, and they may not be the solution of the future, but they're certainly playing a new role. Open education resources, online collaborative tools, badges, flipped classroom, technology-enhanced learning spaces, etc. These are trends that are affecting all universities. So how does the Finnish tertiary education system come out in this new complex world? Well, obviously, as you know better than me, you're doing pretty well. If I look, and I'd like to introduce a difference between what I call performance, which are really the results, and system health, which refers to the factors, the determinants of this performance. The OECD regards Finland as the most well-educated country because of your very high level of attainment measured by the number of years of the adult population or the proportion of people who have a tertiary education degree. You also have very low levels of inequality and in particular an excellent record on gender balance. As measured not only by the proportion of enrollment, but the proportion of enrollment in professions that are not that traditionally do not have a high proportion of women, like engineering, science, and also a good record in terms of leadership positions, especially with a lot of progress in the past few years. If we look at the rankings and citation performance also of Finnish university, your results are very good. And also in terms of technology transfer. And last but not least, we tend to forget that one important role of universities is to help young people acquire positive values. And if we judge from the democracy index calculated by the Economist intelligence unit, you are also pretty high there. If we look at the score sheet of Finnish universities in terms of ranking, in the Shanghai ranking, you have 5 universities in the top 500, with University of Helsinki at number 73, number 100 according to Times Higher Education, and the Leiden ranking, which looks specifically at citations and the impact of your scientific articles. There, the University of Helsinki is not doing so well, but it comes at number 269 out of 500. I have done a calculation where I think that it is important to take into consideration the size of the countries. Just saying how many universities you have is not sufficient. Obviously, the US would come first. But when we look at the number of top 100 universities divided by population of the countries, then we see a different picture. And you may notice on this graph that I have highlighted two states in the US, Massachusetts and California, because they have outstanding results. So if we were to consider them as separate countries, this graph tells us what it gives. So in green, we have the results for the top 100, and in blue, actually the title is slightly wrong, in blue is the top 500. So with respect to the top 500, we would see that the entity that comes first is the state of Massachusetts. Then we have Sweden, and then Finland comes third, which is an excellent result. And right after Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, Australia, Holland. You may notice a pattern there. Small countries like your country are doing extremely well if we relate the results to the population of the country. In fact, you're doing better than the US or the United Kingdom. If we look at the top 100 there, even though you are doing well, your result is not as well. We would have as good. We would have Switzerland as the top country, and then Denmark, Massachusetts, Denmark, and Sweden, Holland, and then California, the US, and Finland would come afterwards. And I'll come back to these results. Again, if we look at scientific citations relative to population, while you are doing relatively well, you are number 6, 7 in the world. But then you have to ask yourself, whom do you want to compare yourself with? You are doing better than the US as a whole, than the UK as a whole, but you are not doing as well as your Nordic competitors. Look at the results of Denmark and Norway and Sweden, or even the Holland. In terms of patents, again, your results are quite well. If we look, if we consider them worldwide, doing better than the UK, or Sweden, Switzerland, or Denmark, but not as well as the US, Australia, Canada, and Norway. Some of you may be familiar with the first country-wide or system-wide ranking prepared by a consortium called Universitas. The ranking was prepared by University of Melbourne with some advice from Shanghai. It's in my book, it's a better ranking than the individual university ranking because it looks at the entire tertiary education system. It controls the indicator for size, and it uses a large range of indicators. It's many more indicators than the typical ranking like Shanghai or Times. So here are the results for the latest one. They have 4 groups of factors: inputs, resources, internationalization dimensions, and outputs. So I'm showing on the left the overall ranking, and on the right the ranking on outputs. US comes, so for the overall, US comes first, then Sweden, Canada, and you come 4th, which is an excellent result. And you come 5th in terms of the output dimension. So this is really very good, very encouraging, I would say. In terms of system health, as we all know, you have your incoming students come with an excellent academic level, as shown by the PISA results. You have a dual system with the universities of applied sciences and the other universities. High level of public funding that has been relatively protected during the crisis. I mean, some of you may think that you've not been protected enough, but again, from an international perspective, you're doing pretty well. And also you've been going through in the recent years a very important governance reform following the example of Denmark, which I believe put you in a very strong footing from that point of view. But there are some outstanding issues as far as I could tell based on the few interviews I conducted and looking at available documents. Issues of completion rates. Students are taking a very long time to complete their degree because many of them work as they study or interrupt their studies to work. Second, even though some of you and many programs have already introduced innovations in their curriculum or their pedagogy, it seems that this is still much more could be done at the in a system-wide perspective. Then there is the issue of reaching critical mass in research, and I believe that the ranking result, the citation results, show that in fact the research is concentrated in a few universities, in a small number of departments. You have many small segmented programs all over the country, and that's an issue that you may want to think about. Internationalization, again, you've done a lot of progress in the past few years, but Finland in that respect is still behind its comparators. And some issues of financial autonomy that may need to address, not major issues, but to complete really the governance reform, you may want to look at them. So to conclude, I would like to offer a few options for consideration, or rather a few themes that I would believe are important to consider as you think about the future of the Finnish tertiary education system. As some of you know, I'm a frequent flyer. Last year I took a plane 174 times, and when I am sitting up in the air, I would not like the pilot to come on the mic and say the following: welcome folks, we are very happy to have you on board. I must tell you that our engines are working very well today, but the steering wheel is not working today. When I'm on a plane, I want everything to be working, and a plane, like a tertiary education system, is a very complex system. So you want to make sure that everything is well aligned as you think about the future. I mentioned the state of California earlier. Now, they have, believe it or not, 11 universities from California among the top 100 in the Shanghai ranking. So if California were a separate independent country, they would be the 34th state in the world in terms of population, the 8th power in terms of economy, but they would be the second country in terms of top-ranked universities. So what happened there? Were they just lucky? Do they have, because the climate is not nice? Or is it a result of a deliberate plan? As we all know, in the late 50s, early 60s, they established a master plan for higher education in California. And so I believe that the two are very closely linked. So moving forward for Finland, I do believe that it would be advisable to elaborate a vision about where you want to stand 10, 15 years from now, to verify, and also to verify that all drivers of performance are well aligned. So if you were to establish a vision for 2025, for example, that would include thinking about the size and the shape of the Finnish system. How do you build up research excellence? How do you diminish the average duration to completion and increase on-time graduation? How do you accelerate the adoption of innovative curricular and pedagogical reforms? How do you expand internationalization? And how do you complete the institutional autonomy reforms? In terms of size and shape, you have to ask yourself, are you going to keep expanding, or are you going to mainly improve internal efficiency? And in that respect, how should the existing institutions keep organizing and strengthening their lifelong learning, their retraining, their career change programs? I do think, and in my report, I try to show how the shape of university could change as they address these issues. Do you want to keep having as many universities, both polytechnics or universities, or is there a need for further consolidation? You already went through some mergers. Do you need more mergers to deal with this issue of critical mass? Do you want, I know that there have been some debate in Finland about eliminating the difference between University of Applied Science and the traditional universities. Or do you want to keep the same structure but make some adjustments? Do you want, right now you have only one university, University of Helsinki, in the top 100. Some, when you look at Sweden, Denmark, or Holland, they are doing better in that respect. But that's a question of philosophy that you have to decide. Do you want to keep having one world-class university, or do you want to seek to upgrade several? The drivers of growth for your enrollment, you have not only the demographics, which are slowing down, this issue of internal efficiency, lifelong learning, and internationalization. Each one has an influence. You have to decide how you want to play it out. In terms of the mergers, here are some aspects to consider. Who takes the initiative? Is it up to the government to take the initiative, or to the institutions? Do you want to force the universities, or do you want to keep it voluntary? I mean, if we look at the Danish experience, it was really a mix between the two, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, strong incentives coming from the government. Of course, it was voluntary in the end, but the role of the government was quite important. And then you have to keep these criteria into consideration. Is it only about geographical proximity, or strategic interests and mutual interests? And most importantly, perhaps, is always to make sure that the programs that merge, the institutions that merge, will complement each other in a nice way. In terms of assessing research excellence, you'll have to keep in mind that it's not only about quantity, but about quality and about impact as you make your decisions in the future. And lastly, it's very important to have a good monitoring system. I want to mention the example of the state of Minnesota in the US. They are trying to move very fast towards becoming a knowledge economy, and they know that higher education is at the heart of the performance of the economy. So they establish very clear goals in terms of quality, of quantity, of equity, and they have set up a benchmarking framework, comparing themselves to other states in the US, but also top countries in the world. And look at that in the bottom. They take Finland, Japan, and Korea as models. So in conclusion, I want to know that in the world, and especially in Europe, we have strong forces of convergence. The Bologna process that you have participated into, the global rankings that I mentioned, and these excellence initiatives. But I want to leave you with a word of caution. Homogenization is not necessarily good. I think that tertiary education systems, and within the systems, institutions, should dare to be different. Excellence doesn't come from copying the others, from imitating, but from finding your own niche and being strong in this niche. You don't want every university to try to fit into a model like everybody wanting to become like Harvard. So my few suggestions to finish, in my view, differentiation and diversification is very healthy, so you should keep it that way. If you want to have more mergers, undertake them for the right reasons, not just to become bigger so that you have a better ranking score, but on complementarity grounds. Not addressing structural issues can have a long-term cost, so it's very important not to forget what needs to be improved. And last but not least, do not allow other people to define your future. You should define the vision for the future of system. I will stop there so that we can have time for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jamil,